I am just saying these what if titles need to get shorter because there's only so much I can fit into my YouTube title. All right, Marvel, you got to help me out here because this episode of Marvel's What If Doctor Strange lost his heart, not his hands, it's just a mouthful. It does not roll off the tongue super well as like a simple title. Anyways, that's my intro. I'm gonna go with it. Welcome everybody. Yes, I'm finally back on camera, fully recovered. Well, not fully, but mostly recovered from being sick. At least good enough to look all pretty on camera for all of you. Just in time to review Marvel's What If Episode 4. The title that I already said. What if Doctor Strange lost his heart and not his hands? Again, mouthful of a title, but an interesting episode to be back on screen discussing. Because I have to say, this episode felt like... Honestly, it feels really weird to talk about this episode and to find a lot to say about it because I feel like on one hand, this story of Doctor Strange losing Christine and that sort of setting him off on this path to like try and bring her back from the dead and sort of getting wrapped up in not living a life and losing and getting wrapped up in seeking power to be able to save her and it causing like this big sort of larger thing. That story, to be honest with you, is fairly bog standard, and I've seen it a billion times before. Like, it's honestly really difficult for me to look at that story and be like, there's a lot to critique here, because honestly, there really isn't. It's not badly done. It's just sort of a story that's there. I've seen it a bunch of times. But the interesting thing with that is I feel like the reason that this story was so simple and was sort of like a kind of a story that we've really kind of seen before, sort of hubris, like trying to bring someone back from the dead, sort of going too far and breaking the rules in order to do so. The fact that we got this sort of standard of story was because the story kind of was serving another function within this what if mythos, trying to build out the like different concepts and ideas within the multiverse of Marvel. And this episode does a lot of really crazy, insane stuff and setting up really insane rules and makes me think a lot about how the multiverse and universes even work within Marvel, as well as makes me think about the Watcher's place and role within this universe. But again, we'll get to that, but let's kind of get into this. Let me start off by critiquing the actual story that we get here, and then we'll get into sort of the more multi-physical, crazy, weird stuff that this story is introducing. As I said, the story here is fairly bog standard. It's, we get the sort of things that we've been getting in the rest of What If, where we get sort of a scene from a movie, one of the Marvel movies, and it's just twisted a little bit of a different way. Kind of taking the same standard as 1, 3, and 4, or 1 and 3, as opposed to 2, which kind of set it off and did its whole other thing based off of one decision. So, but this time, instead of getting run off by the truck, Doctor Strange falls off the bridge, and Christine dies in sort of his heart. And then the rest. What's interesting here, though, is the rest of the movie of Doctor Strange pretty much, we're told, plays out the same, and it's what happens after that changes up, which is kind of an interesting, to a degree, setup for this movie, considering that we don't really have much of Doctor Strange post the Doctor Strange movie, other than his appearances in sort of other Marvel works like Thor Ragnarok and Avengers Endgame and Infinity War, and the upcoming Spider-Man movie. So it's kind of intriguing to sort of see something that's like, could happen, a what if, but also to a degree, a what if of an era and a character that we don't really have context for. So in that vein, it is interesting, but everything that follows after that pretty much follows exactly what you would expect. He goes back in time, tries to save her, fails a bunch of times, and then sort of gets told that he's going too far, and then goes back in time to Cagliostro, the lost library that was referenced in the first Doctor Strange movie, and then realizes that he starts becoming evil and sucking up too much power. And the thing I will say with the characterization of this Doctor Strange, of this Strange who's going off on this evil path, is you really do, you never really get the sense of him being like evil, which is kind of an easy way to do this, even towards the end of the episode where he's facing off against the other Doctor Strange. We'll talk about that in a second. You never get the sense that he's like so far gone that he is like a truly dark and evil person. I kind of like that because it kind of still hints at this core that Doctor Strange may be blinded by ego, which is something that fits his character. He's kind of very Tony Stark in that way. And it's something we saw in the movie proper, that he's a very egotistically driven person, but he's not a bad person, even if he will let his ego rule him if given the right circumstances. And so I liked that characterization for him here. However, the other thing I will knock against this episode is the pace is so insanely slow. I saw every beat coming. I knew every beat was coming, and so many scenes just happen over and over and over again, and I've seen them so many times. And so I was kind of like losing track of my attention several times through the episode because I'm like, all right, this scene's going to go on for another 2 or 3 minutes of him like doing like absorbing power, of him watching Christine die, and I kind of got it, and I understand why they needed to show it, and I appreciate they were trying to do it for different slower pace, and I don't mind slower pace media, but slower pace has to be serving like an emotional catharsis, whereas this one it just felt like I was kind of just bored. It's sort of that hard balance when you're trying to do a slower pace piece. So ultimately, at the end of the day, I feel like this story kind of felt redundant and a little bit overdone and overwrought. But again, as I said, I feel like the reason that was done, the slower pace, the sort of crazier, so the standard plot was in service of the crazier aspects that this episode was kind of tasked with introducing, because I feel a lot of the things that we're getting here are going to be things not only that are going to play somewhat of a role in What If going forward, but also within the Marvel universe as a whole, kind of doing what Loki and even WandaVision to a degree were sort of building out, in the sense of like we are starting to build the rules of the multiverse so that people, when they go into the big Marvel movies, will have a little bit more of a grasp on it, at least if they watch this stuff. Even though the movies, I'm sure, will not be bogged down with as much exposition here. They're expecting like Marvel movie watchers will have friends who will explain all this nonsense to them, like me. So what we get is we learn that there are absolute points in time, kind of like Doctor Who sort of thing, where there's moments in every like timeline that cannot be changed. No matter what you do, they cannot be changed, and the universe will always try to self-correct to do it. However, that's interesting on its own, but we've seen that done in Doctor Who. However, the intriguing part of all of that is the fact that this is a universe that is different from the universe that we watched in the Marvel movie, where this absolute point in time did not happen. So absolute points in time are insular to their own universes within the multiverse, which is an interesting layer and complication to add onto this that the episode doesn't dress into, but if you start thinking about it, and it kind of hints at it with the Watcher mentioning like, well, I could save this universe, but if I do, risk the rest of the other universe. It's sort of hinting at the larger multiverse going on here. And I find that deeply fascinating. It's a nice added twist on a regular idea with when it comes to time travel and when it comes to multiverses, that multiverses have absolute points in time, and yet those absolute points in time do not have to be the same across different multiverses, but those absolute points in time define those multiverses. Like this moment with Christine dying defined what made this multiverse, this specific universe, its own thing. So that's such an interesting complication and addition to this plot. And again, you can start to see why these like crazy things kind of need to be put into a smaller paced plot here. The other thing too that we got in this episode as well was the fact that 2 timelines can exist within a universe, which is its own kind of heady concept that I'm not even ready to begin to download, because there's a lot there to think. Like, how does that even happen? Does that make a different universe? But it's within the same universe, but it's still part of the multiverse. And so it's an interesting concept, and you can see why this would be a sort of a dangerous idea, not only for them to do within the show, but like conceptually just to get across. Because even I, someone who listens to time travel stuff, find that it's such a weird, heady idea to have 2 timelines coexisting within the same universe, within a multiverse of itself, which I'm curious if that's going to be brought out in future What If storylines or others like Marvel properties, because it's such a weird concept, a very, very heady concept that I loved and I was down for. I found it kind of fascinating, to be honest with you, but I don't necessarily know how that will fit in other stories. But I liked seeing the 2 different Doctor Stranges. The one thing I will say is it kind of led me to feel like this other Doctor Strange, the one that was like the good one, the quote unquote, the one that like chose to not save Christine, that was created in the split, kind of felt a little bit cheapened. Just sort of like a plot device character. Like I didn't buy his arc because we saw that this Strange had already gone on a different arc, and so it was just sort of like spur of the moment weird that he shifted. So I didn't buy this Doctor Strange as much, but I feel like that, again, it was just more in service of getting us this idea across, because in the end, what I also really loved was the fact that in the final battle, that Doctor Strange, the one that the good one, quote unquote, lost. that he did not win, because it wouldn't have made sense. The other one had so much more power, and the Deus Ex protection spell that Wong gave him it didn't feel like it would stand up to the amount of power, the centuries of power that this other Doctor Strange had been built. Though I like that this Doctor Strange tried to convince the good Doctor Strange to come to his side, because it kind of fit that he would, considering that their choices would have been pretty much the same up until that one little divergent point where the separate timelines were created. So I felt all that decently worked well within here, and sort of built upon itself in an interesting, intriguing way. And I'll get to the ending here too, but this leads me to the other piece of this, is we're starting to get little hints that the Watcher can influence events, kind of feels an impetus to, but has certain rules that he can't. And I really like the scene initially where Watcher says, I could get involved, but I don't think I can. It would risk these other universes. You could see him sort of his own, whether it's his own rules or other rules, preventing him from getting involved. Fascinating. And I like the sort of break of the fourth wall to a degree, not only for us, that he's clearly talking to us, the audience, and I'm curious what that means for the concept of the show, because his breaking the fourth wall, talking to us, gets heard by Doctor Strange. So, do we, the audience, exist within the Marvel Universe? And what role do we play within this conversation? Very trippy stuff. Again, a lot of things going on here. But then I liked at the end here, too, that Doctor Strange just literally calls out to the Watcher, who is watching, and basically begs him to change things, and the Watcher chooses not to. And I'm starting to see that that's probably going to be a slow character setup for the Watcher, because I'm betting you by the end of the series, the Watcher will get involved in something or other. Whether that leads to good or ill, probably ill, considering his ominous words that, getting involved only leads to more destruction. I'm betting you that leads to more ill down the line. But an interesting sort of setup. Again, it's something we kind of all anticipated. It's something I've been thinking was going to happen. But to have it happen this episode with other stuff going on within it as well, kind of creates an interesting kind of addition to that. Because it was like, oh, this is going to happen, but it gets way trippier than just him wanting to get involved because of whatever reasons. That universe has to be at stake for him to want to get involved. But he's willing to sacrifice universes in the name of protecting others, which is also kind of interesting and probably will lead into Multiverse of Madness stuff as well. The protection of the multiverse over singular universes. And ultimately, I kind of like, while it is a sort of time-honored tale, I do like that this episode ended with Doctor Strange just saying he's very sorry and failing and honestly just not going well. The universe is all destroyed because of his hubris. Again, a tale as old as time, almost, but one that was decently effective here. So at the end of the day, I think my review is kind of mixed on this. On the one hand, the story being told didn't fascinate me all that much. I was kind of bored by it. But the larger implications that this episode sets up and is clearly trying to is really more in service of. This episode was not in service of this story. It was more in service of setting up these larger ideas here, and the story was sort of simple on the back of that. I don't necessarily know if the show could have done it much better than it did, but ultimately it leads me in this sort of mixed feeling of I liked some of the concepts, but as an episode that I just sort of wanted to enjoy some entertainment with, I found it kind of lacking. But it did leave me kind of thinking of larger, bigger implications, which is interesting for Marvel, because Marvel's usually much better at making me feel like I enjoyed this piece of media, the thing that I watched, and then sort of be interested about the other stuff going on. Whereas this one really just feels like it was more about the other stuff going on than the actual story, even though the story wasn't bad, but it wasn't particularly great or interesting as well. So ultimately, that's kind of my feelings on it. It's kind of hard to come down to consensus on this one. Ultimately, I found it fascinating, but wasn't entirely sure how I felt about the actual story and entertainment value of this episode going forward. I think this will be an episode that I will read the Wikipedia page entry on to remind myself of some stuff. If I ever need to, then I'll ever come back to it to want to enjoy myself watching, I guess is probably the best way to put it. But that's my thoughts on this episode. Did you find it crazy or weird or insane? I'd love to hear all your thoughts down in the comments below. Also, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Also, don't forget I have a Patreon, all that stuff. But beyond all of that, thank you so much for watching. I hope that you, as always, live long and stay sexy.